Welcome, everybody. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesday and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, the campaign wants to connect with you. On Facebook, like Campaign for GLR, Twitter, follow the account Reading by Third, and on LinkedIn, subscribe to us at Campaign for GLR. The webinar will begin shortly and it will be recorded. Once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Evan Bronson and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. We just have a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we'd like to introduce yourself using the chat box at the bottom of the screen. Share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. The webinar will be recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as any responses and slides shared during the conversation, will be shared in a follow-up email to all who have registered. We will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during the closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And we want to just take a minute to share some of the upcoming webinars. Later today, we will be having a webinar from classroom to community, investing in whole child support systems from cradle to career, co-sponsored by Whiteboard Advisors. Next week, we'll be having a partner webinar entitled Access and Action, Why Diverse Books Matter, co-sponsored by First Book and Diverse Books for All Coalition. And the following week, we'll have a Funder to Funder workshop about digital access and data, co-sponsored by the Patterson Foundation. And finally, on April 4th, we'll have a Learning Loss Recovery Challenge entitled The Role of States in Enabling High Impact Tutoring to Scale, co-sponsored by Overdeck Family Foundation. Now, we want to take a minute to share that we're inviting everyone to participate in this year's What's Working Exchange. We're gathering information about nationwide efforts related to a few strategies which support learning loss recovery. The question form is easy to complete and takes about 5 to 8 minutes. Your responses will be used to connect communities with one another and deepen our impact in early literacy for children. We will post a link to the question form in the chat. Joining you now is Sarah Torian, Chief Learning and Engagement Officer with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading.
Thank you, Evan, and welcome everyone. We're delighted that you could all join us for today's session. After a brief cold snap where I am here in Virginia, the sun is shining outside my windows and the temperatures are starting to warm up right now, which has me thinking about the summer months, which are just around the corner. A part of the year that the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and many of our partners have long viewed as being critical to the children's early school success. Summer is a time when children in economically challenged families who lack access to the high quality, engaging learning programs are at risk of losing up to 2 months of reading achievement, exacerbating achievement gaps with their higher income peers. And after the pandemic-precipitated learning loss amplified those opportunity and achievement gaps in the past few years, now more than ever, we need to take action to ensure that children in low-income families have opportunities to accelerate learning recovery this summer and in the summers to come. So in last week's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar, we investigated the $22 billion set aside in federal funding to support communities and states in launching and sustaining comprehensive after-school and summer enrichment programs and how they're utilizing those funds. Today, we're going to kind of continue that conversation, but we're going to shift our focus a little bit to look at the roles that philanthropy can play to support states and communities in strategically using public, private, and philanthropic funding to plan and implement effective research-based programs. And to begin that conversation, I'm incredibly honored to welcome and introduce our panel for today. First, I'd like to welcome Kate Bennett. In her 20 plus years at United Way of Central Iowa, Kate has held a number of roles focused on supporting education and success for children in the Central Iowa region, currently serving as the Community Impact Officer. Over the years, she's helped to create a collaborative system for government and nonprofits to support children and families birth through age 8, spearheaded efforts to increase the high school graduation rate across a 3-county region, and launched United to Thrive framework to integrate a focus on equity and pandemic recovery into education efforts. Welcome, Kate. Welcome also to Gwen Hughes, serving as a senior program officer at the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. Gwen manages the foundation's largest grant-making portfolio, Advancing After School, which supports, among other organizations, 50 statewide after-school networks and promotes out-of-school learning time both during the school year and during the summer months. Among other previous roles, Gwen served as executive director at the Massachusetts After School Partnership in Boston for 6 years. And finally, I'd like to welcome Polly Singh. Polly serves as a senior program officer at the Wallace Foundation, where she works in the after-school program area and oversees grants and Wallace's expanded learning and strengthening financial management initiatives, helping after-school providers adopt best practices in financial management. So welcome to all 3 of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. Polly, I'd like to start with you first, if we could. I really doubt that we need to sell any of the attendees on today's webinar with the value and benefits of investing in high quality summer and out of school time learning programs, but just to reinforce that understanding of the value and to remind us what we mean when we say high quality summer and out of school time programs. Could you share some quick highlights from the study that the RAND Corporation did for the Wallace Foundation a few years ago in terms of the benefits of summer learning and what high quality looks like?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First, I just want to say hello to our audience. Welcome. Thank you for joining us near the spring equinox. Happy spring, everyone. Thank you for having me join Campaign for Grade Level Reading. I love talking about the science of learning, the science of literacy. I think it's just so important to keep that in mind as we think about the topic of summer learning, right? So that is what undergirds, like those science of learning undergirds all of the findings that we have in our summer learning toolkit and it really gleans from the lessons from our National Summer Learning Project. This summer learning project covered 5 districts across the United States. And we have a set of resources with knowledge drawn, posted on our website. All of them are here on our website, on your screen right now. And they're available for download for free on our website. So feel free to check those out at your discretion. And then on the next slide is where I'll dig into Sarah's question. Really great question in terms of the key summer learning elements. First of all, I think there may be a lag in how it's showing up. Yes, I think if you click through, there was like a great graphic that unfolds. But these were the key summer learning elements that we learned from that effort with 5 districts that were in the cohort. Is, you really have to have a no-cost full-day program for 5 to 6 weeks, right? And you'll see why in the next slide, why all of these elements are important. All of these are elements of quality, but they're also elements of what it takes to pull off a really high-functioning summer learning programs. Okay, I'm sorry, can you go back to the other slide? You need small classes of 15 or fewer students. Certified teachers focus on 3 hours of academics per day. And there's a mix of not just academics, but enrichment as well. So because you want the approach to be whole child, not just academic skill building, but there are other skills and experiential learning that you could foster during that day. And of course, meals and transportation, whenever possible, free, of course, whenever possible, but in order to cover the cost and to encourage high attendance, high participation, right? And that will drive the benefits for young people. And as you'll see in our next slide. So in the next slide, you'll see when we looked at the outcome findings, we saw that high attenders, those students who attended 20 days or more for the first summer, we saw immediate math benefits that persisted through spring. So those gains that they had from summer persisted through the spring the following year. And then high attenders for the second summer had math and language arts benefits persisting through spring as well. And we saw some benefits in social emotional learning. This piece right here, that third finding, the time on task and the quality of instruction also linked to greater benefits. And that means you have to have qualified teachers, licensed teachers teaching the curriculum, and you want to use an evidence-based curriculum in order to get those outcomes and benefits for young people. And among students who attended at least one day, about 60% were the high attenders. The recruitment, retention, like I could not emphasize this point enough. Like you have, in order to have students, because you're really also shifting the narrative of from summer school to learning can happen in summer and can be fun and engaging. So there is a little bit of a culture shift that you have to foster as you take on as you take on implementing a summer learning program. So to answer your question, I mean, those were the quality elements and those were the findings that we found from our summer learning project effort. So I'm happy to continue the conversation and hear more.
No, thank you for that. That's a great kind of overview about what it takes and the benefits that you can see at the incredible results, or kind of the benefits that you see at the end of the summer being sustained through until the spring of the next year, and making sure that those kids come back a second year to really sustain the learning. Thank you for that. So Gwen, I know that Mott has been a leader in advancing after school and summer learning opportunities for decades. What would you add to what Polly just shared in terms of the benefits of high quality summer and after school learning opportunities all the time, but especially in this moment of pandemic precipitated learning loss? Oh, I think you're still on mute.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to be here, and thanks to the Grade Level Reading Campaign for all of the work that you are doing. And just looking through the chat to sort of see who's joining us here today from across the country. And I think I saw Canada too. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It is so critical and crucial right now. It always is, but especially as we help our young people recover and thrive from the pandemic. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm at the Mott Foundation, and just to tell you a little bit about our work, because it's relevant, I think, to the question here that Sarah is asking. For the Mott Foundation, I manage our after-school national work. We provide about $16 million in support annually. And over the past 20 some years, over 350 million. And I raise that because we really see the value of after school and summer learning. And when we talk about after school, we include summers, before school, after school, vacation time. And what I've always really appreciated about our foundation too is the starting point for this work really grows out of a passion for community schools and the lighted schoolhouse model, where we started in Flint, Michigan. That the whole idea is to open up the school buildings for the community and to really provide enrichment and learning for kids outside of school and over the summer. You know, the research that Polly and the Wallace Foundation share is so crucial to, you know, our overall goal of establishing more of these programs. So what I want to add to that is the importance of the broad-based approach right now for our young people. And I still don't think that we're hearing enough about that need and demand in our policymaker conversations, with a lot of our schools and superintendents and education leaders who really have been heroes in so many communities throughout the pandemic. I'm reminded of for some recent research that we helped to support. We worked with a bunch of young people across the country and included a survey of what they would like to see in their future after school programs. And one of the things that the young people said in response to some questions is, what do you really hope for your program? And one of the answers that stuck with me was, you'd feel the love when you walked in the room. And I raised that because there is definitely a need. I mean, we need all of these interventions. We need tutoring. We need specialized supports. We need help to catch up on early literacy and math so kids don't fall further behind. But to do that, to actually make that learning stick right now for so many of our young people who have experienced serious trauma as a result of the pandemic, losing their caregiver, losing a special person in their support network, simply missing the school and the socialization that comes along with school and continued support in after school programs, to really engage young people right now to learn. They need a lot of support. They need access to mental health supports. They need consistent access to food and, not letting those basics go. This is some of the real work right now that I think also, is difficult for educators who really need more and more support to provide these whole child or more holistic approaches. And what I love about summer, that time, is it is such an opportunity to provide a range of programming, and it really needs to be fun. It needs to be fun to engage kids to get the kinds of results that we want to see. I think about, for instance, my own son who's 10 and doing kind of a battle of the books project right now, where the whole school is reading a certain amount of books, and they can get certain rewards, and they love that, and that is fun. That could be part of a program. But if I told my son that he's now going to a tutoring program all summer that didn't involve athletics, sports, his friends, that would be a really tough thing. And that's, in a community where there are some resources. What we can't allow to happen is to have so many of our young people without choices for fun, whether it's getting kids outside of Boston for the first time, getting them over to MIT, getting them to visit the islands like around where I am, or it's in South Carolina where we work with some programs there, and they're providing STEAM education, engineering programs to high school students during the summer. These things have to be connected, have to help ignite the spark for young people, for them to be engaged, for them to stay in the program. And that's the opportunity of summer.
I love that, Polly was kind of pointing out that if we want the results that we want in terms of the academics, we need to get kids there on a regular basis, high attenders. You're not going to get them there by just focusing on the academics. You make it fun. You make them feel loved, engaging, and the games, and both academic games like reading competitions. All of that is wonderful. So I love the way that you really kind of complemented each other in that response. So as we've said before, both of your foundations have been longtime supporters and investors in increased access to high quality summer and out of school learning opportunities, especially for kids in economically challenged families. I've been doing it a long time, but the past few years have been so incredibly challenging and so incredibly different, posing unique and different challenges for all of us. Can you both kind of take a moment to share a little bit about if and how your foundations kind of had to adapt, shift gears maybe a little bit, approaches and priorities in response to the challenges posed by the pandemic? And Gwen, we'll start with you, or stay with you to start this question if you want.
Sure. I think that it was a great opportunity to, I think do what we try to do, but to do it even more intentionally, which is to listen to what our grantees needed and really what they were needing because of what families and young people were needing. One of the things that Polly and I, our organizations worked on together actually was something we called the After School and Emergency Opportunity Fund. And that was the pooled fund effort as where a bunch of funders got together. It was helped to be organized by grant makers for education because, we all have full-time jobs. So that extra help to really keep us on track. I think identifying early on ways that we could coalesce together to help support our grantees was really critical. Some of the other strategies we used was really to use our convening power again to, kind of help facilitate, not to do it, but to help facilitate, help provide support to organizations and grantees of ours. I remember a time where we were just learning about the pandemic. And Sarah, you had mentioned we support the 50-state after school network. So that includes intermediary organizations in every state. And I encourage all of you out there, if you're not familiar, to reach out to the state network in your state. And we could see right from the beginning, we were hearing from Washington State about the first couple of weeks of the pandemic when schools were closing, what programs needed on the ground. That was then translated to states across the country so that by the time it came to New York, there was that already that kind of, sense of here's what we need to do in the next couple of weeks. I hope that, I'm reminded too, particularly for our conversation today, the Georgia Statewide After School Network, for instance, developed with a bunch of different states, one of the first online curriculums for summer for remote learning to distribute it out to programs. And I think that took our role in that. Again, these were, the ideas that were generated by our grantees. Our role was really to convene, to support, to provide that continued funding, to really help mobilize, during kind of an emergency time. And I think our challenge now that I'll just kind of leave us with before we go to Polly to consider is to not lose that sense of emergency for our young people and to keep a lot of the, some of these things that many programs and communities developed during the time. They set up remote learning hubs over the summer so kids could have safe access to internet. Also during the school year for emergency workers, there are sort of other models and things that funders have the opportunity, because we're not doing that day-to-day work with young people, to help push for. And I hope that we don't lose that momentum. I think that's part of our role as funders locally and nationally, is to kind of help remind the system, no, systems just want to go back. They want to go back to, it's just part of how our infrastructure works. And I think there's extra help and push needed to kind of keep these models growing and also keep the needs of kids, more importantly, front and center. I like to say it's a marathon, not a sprint, in terms of what we're looking at in terms of COVID recovery for young people. I think we have to plan for that.
Thank you for that. And in referencing the statewide after-school networks in the Georgia example, just wanted to let everybody know we featured somebody, the leader of the Georgia statewide after-school network, on last week's GLO Learning Tuesdays webinar. So we'll try and make sure that we share a link to that when we do our follow-up, so that you guys can hear more about the great work that they've been doing in Georgia. So turning to you, Polly, can you tell us a little bit about, obviously you two, or Wallace and Mott, were making those shifts together in some ways that Gwen was just sharing, but can you tell us a little bit more about the shifts that you all made in response to the pandemic?
Sure. Sarah, I'm realizing I didn't cover my last slide with the National Academies of Science findings. And I think that might help to just if you could
Yeah, let's bring that back up.
slide up. That would be great. So and I'm referenced this, and also like how our thinking also started to shift. I think it had already begun to shift pre-pandemic, but I think the pandemic itself accelerated, right? That shift. And I think, Gwen mentioned things like opportunity and momentum, and not losing sight of how great the need of young people are across the country. And this was a more recent study conducted by the National Academies of Science. I think that there's also a link related to this study that we could share. But it also talked about summer, and it covers a lot of the items that Gwen already spoke to in terms of summertime experiences and the effects that it can have on academics, health, SEL, safety outcomes, especially for young people in disadvantaged communities, in low income, from high poverty communities. And it's worse in those communities, especially, and that this study highlighted where those findings are. And there are opportunities for systems and agents to implement innovative new programs and extend effective practices. So there is an evidence base already. It's just, how do you conduct that translational science to reverse engineer so that it's more broadly available to young people, right? So that you can incorporate those practices to get the kinds of outcomes. And I'm saying all of this, and I know that all of the burnout that we experienced throughout the pandemic, teacher burnout, schools were on a reactive mode in terms of finding children, getting to them, ensuring that they're safe, ensuring that they have their basic needs met, food, shelter, ensuring that first, right, as a first response. And also ensuring yourself, also from the chronic, I think the chronic state of uncertainty that we were in. But I think this study also, it's the state of this study, what we were learning in terms of the inequity and the inequitable access. You could take the slide down, thank you. But also the chronic state of emergency reactive mode also shifted how we were thinking about distribution of funds, and how do we how do we work with cross-sector partnership. We knew that we wanted to not just work with institutions, but also have, we saw that through our Partnership for Social Emotional Learning initiative, where we're currently working with 6 communities across the country, is that not-for-profits were more nimble, right? They're able to get out there and reach, whereas district had to shut down their schools, folks could not access their buildings. Not-for-profits could be more nimble, could go and offer and bring in, convene, and offer services to families, to children, and be more nimble. And we saw a lot of districts redirecting funding to not-for-profits in those communities. And there was an incentive that came about as that shift started to, wait, there's a there. And we started to think about, how do we adapt how we work? How do we adapt where we put our funding and our focus? But also we began to collaborate differently. Gwen mentioned a great example in terms of collaborating with other funders, collaborating and collaborating differently. And we had to do that. We had to evolve and adapt given the situation. And I think also looking at who we typically listen to, looking at that, it gave us time to reflect at who is in the room and who are not in the room, frankly, right? And how can we be more expansive in our thinking in terms of listening differently and ensuring that we're being more inclusive and to the different voices that are out there. We began, funding national organizations that had typically focused on marginalized young people, the National Urban League, Unidos, organizations that while we had funded them as advisors, they hadn't, had a direct implementation program funding in the past. And, I love the example of community schools. We also, formed a grant with the Institute for Education Leadership, as well as the National Indian Education Association. So it was a different partnership for us. And we also found there is a National Rural Education Association. So there are so many groups. Now it was our job to go and look and find and begin that partnership and partner differently with them.
I love all of those examples. And also it seems like, just as I think Quinn was saying, that we can't go back and that there is kind of like this institutional drag that takes us back. But it's exciting to hear how your foundations have really made these shifts and are embracing them in the ways that you're thinking about future efforts and future funding. That's really great to hear. So now I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into what these pandemic shifts look like at the state and local level. So starting first with the state level support and investments that you all are both making. Can you tell us a little bit about the ways that you are supporting states in both recognizing the potential of summer and out of school time learning opportunities for learning loss recovery and for long-term just better supporting children, and then how you're helping them take action around what we know are high quality programs? And we'll stay with you to start this one, Polly.
Sure. So I have two great examples. So this is when, we went into thinking mode. Honestly, our efforts, so we have two examples. One is our work with the Texas Education Agency, which actually began just as the pandemic. We kicked that project off around March, April 2020. And then the other project that we've supported was with the Council of Chief State School Officers and the National Summer Learning Association. And that project kicked off a year later in March 2021. So I'll talk about Texas first. That work was really an adaptation. Could we use the findings that I just shared earlier? Could we use those findings and adapt it to Texas and their efforts there locally? And could we potentially conduct a pilot, do a sort of like a spread scale approach where we're sharing what the practices are, what are key lessons, and how could we essentially, the lessons from the National Summer Learning Project involve 5 districts. We wanted to reach 75 districts across the state of Texas. That the variation, the breadth of Texas, this was another approach, and could it be done? And Texas Education Agency, it was a different partnership, a different collaboration with the agency. We also partner with the Communities Foundation for Texas, where we provided small grants to incentivize participation in that effort. So it was funding differently, and we were essentially training the trainer, handing these tools so that they could be adapted to the setting in Texas, and working with them to intentionally pilot this effort over the course of 3 to 5 years. And what would it take to do that? Did we lose Sarah? I think we lost Sarah, but I'm going to keep going because I'm hoping that she'll join us back. The other work that we've supported, CCSSO and NSLA, that effort launched in 2021, just as ARPA was being released, and there was also a coincidental launch through the US DOE, where they were also convening a set of states to share funds that were becoming available, and the cross-sector partnership with districts and states, and how can we have a learning community with the evidence base in summer and after school. So it was like so serendipitous at this moment. While we were all remote still, right? I mean, we were still all remote, but still figuring out how can we continue to glean and adapt lessons and work differently, right? Collaborate differently. You kind of have to let go of those turf, like district is my turf, OST is my turf. It's more of a, how do we work differently? Because we are working to serve children, to serve the instructors, those people, I hesitate to say front lines, but they are, right? The essential workers that we need to support these efforts, to support our communities and to build our communities. And we have to collaborate different to foster those relationships. I probably went over my time, but Sarah, thank you. I'm glad that you're back.
Thank you for continuing to talk, Polly, while I struggled with my internet. But this is why I always make sure we have our phone numbers jotted down so that we can jump back in on the phone as needed. So I hope hope this will work for the rest of the time. So Gwen, can you tell us a little bit more about how Mott is supporting states? And I'll be listening from the phone, so I will hear everything you say.
No problem. I know. It happens, right? I thought I want to start the answer to this question. There's a question in the chat. And I just want to start there because I think the question is, do we make a sharp distinction between programs that offer academic support versus social emotional support? And can we think of tutoring as not just academic, but also mentoring and SEL support? And I appreciate this question because it kind of is, I'm going to then, if you don't mind, use this as a lead into, I think, some of the work that we need to be doing more collectively. In a perfect world, absolutely, is kind of what I think of in terms of an answer. And I think what tends to happen, though, which, we can help change if we're able to work collectively, is that too often the tutoring programs become kind of one-off, or it's more of a plug and play. That, again, of course, can be very helpful. So, I want to be clear that we need all of these things. What I'm excited about is the momentum behind what we kind of refer to as comprehensive after school and summer learning opportunities. And that can absolutely include tutoring. But what we're saying is we want to really help communities. We want to see partnerships with schools and community organizations that are providing a full range of supports and enrichment opportunities, to have kids engage in the arts after school, to set up STEAM, really amazing STEAM programs like they have in Maryland, where kids are really super engaged in school and learning because they're participating, they're learning through doing, they're learning through things that they love to do, like the arts, like sports. I think that to do that, though, it requires more policy action and many more partnerships. And what we have focused on with the State After School Network, so these are essentially coalitions that exist in part to create partnerships to support young people. For our grant, what we have done for many years is we require a partnership with the State Department of Education in order to receive a network grant. Beyond that, though, what we're really asking the states, and so it's not a top down, and it's with many, many local funders, some of whom I hope are on this call today, because this is not something one foundation can do by itself. We say to the state, tell us who your partners are who can move this issue. Who's going to help create comprehensive summer learning opportunities in your state? Where are the key partnerships? And, one thing I've learned the hard way over the years, I will say, is every state is different, So I have one of our, consultants we work with who likes to say, there's no education system, right? We don't have a system that you can easily send, certain protocols or certain things through, because we have very strong and increasingly more localized, education decision-making authority. So we really think that supporting state and local is going to be increasingly where we can have, impact. And I would, really ask my colleagues who are local funders, creating those partnerships, particularly around now the rescue plan funding. So I know that Sarah shared with me that you've heard a little bit about, already the overview of ARP funding, but essentially $22 billion that are going to local districts that can be used for after school and summer learning opportunities, including, programs that include tutoring and many more enrichment activities. But, we're not quite getting enough partnerships out there into those, to help schools to say, I'm here to help you. I'm here to help the district put this money into effect so that it's sustainable and it's really what our kids need in that community. And I think we do need a lot more support at the local level, local funders and state funders who can work together to help. And that really is, we don't have a lot of time on that front. That's in the next year or two to really make an impact. And it's a huge opportunity. I just want to share in terms of partnerships, while we're talking about the states, it's been really fantastic to work with the current administration, the Department of Education. And if you haven't heard about this already, the Department of Education has issued, Engage Every Student, which I can see Sarah has probably talked about that before. But, it's really wonderful to see this leadership with the Department of Education, and we're working to support some of the key grantees of this project. So that's another way that I think foundations can really get involved here, whether it's, state, national, or local. But if you haven't heard about Engage Every Student, I would encourage you to find out.
If they haven't heard about it, I just dropped some links in there with a link about the work, the investments that MOD is making, and then also just about Engage Every Student. Thank you for sharing that. And that also, thank you for kind of starting with the way that you framed around the tutoring and like the focus on academics. And some of the sessions that we've had before talk about the fact that, tutoring is all about relationships. And kind of like the relationship between the tutor and the tutee, that's where the learning really, that's the root and the foundation of the learning, and kind of making that engaging and fun and supportive. But so you were kind of getting into your perfect segue for my next question in terms of the $22 billion in set asides for local education agencies to support after school and summer programming, an incredible opportunity right now at the local level. So can each of you kind of share a little bit about the ways that you're supporting that local action, whether it's through kind of these statewide networks or other ways, but supporting localities and launching, scaling, expanding, enhancing out of school time learning programs? And I'll stay with you to start this one, Gwen.
Sure. I really do think this is a window of opportunity that the likes of which we haven't seen And one of the challenges, of course, it's hard to, and I always couch that in being mindful that what our young people are experiencing is not an opportunity, but it is an opportunity for this sector to better meet the needs of young people. The amount of resources that are out there through the American Rescue Plan and really other COVID dollars is historic. I think the After School Alliance has, there's a total of about $6 billion that has been allocated to date, but still more to go, obviously. We have really focused our efforts, like I said, on Engage Every Student, because keeping the momentum and focus on these issues, I think, is key. We do have a partnership with the AASA, the Superintendents Association. Often I think it's not just an after-school program approaching the school district, right? It's also about really supporting the school district to reach out to the community and to provide them with models of different types of programs that they could easily implement. One of the things we've really seen to be effective, and that's why I encourage all of you to reach out to our networks, is examples of programs, and even for local funders to help school districts develop examples. I think right now it's one of these, really hard times where there are all these resources, but it's not an easy time to set up new programs. It's a very hard time. And so I think as funders, we need to really step in and try to make it easier. Try to make it easier to try new things, try to help. One of the things I love about what AASA does is to provide that technical assistance. So, you might come into not understanding a regulation or not thinking you can do something through Title I. It's very important to know what the rules are, absolutely. It's also important to know what you can do. So I think those kinds of pieces is exactly where the sector is living right now and where the opportunity is. So it is in some of those details, working through with school districts. At the state level, we're continuing to support the network work. And one of the things I do think is encouraging and goes to sort of this window of opportunity, with when after school and summer learning, I think, really stepped up during the pandemic in ways that I'm not sure folks expected, or in some ways was kind of a surprise. We have to continue to be there and demonstrate that after school and summer learning is an essential part of an overall student experience, and really figure out with our policy, with our partnerships, how do we, create a more systemic change to get more of these programs available for kids. And, we're doing that with the networks, with funding policy efforts. If you are interested in learning more about how to support policy, I really encourage you to get in touch. And I know Wallace is very, very skilled at this too. But this is where I think we really need to be looking at, and the technical assistance, but doing it in a way that is supportive of communities and not sort of in a top down.
Important point. Thank you. Polly, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you all are doing to support localities? And I think you referenced one of them, the way you're working with 6 districts earlier, but love to hear more about that and other efforts.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So the 6 districts I mentioned earlier are the Partnership for Social Emotional Learning initiative. And that initiative is actually in year 6 of 6. So it's actually coming to its sunsetting currently. But we, in terms of the summer learning spread and scale strategy, we have been employing for quite some time. We're in a second year of a 2-year work with FHI 360. And I think there's some links that we can share through that effort, both for our website and as well as FHI 360. Through that effort, FHI is working with about 100 districts across the country to provide technical assistance in summer. How districts can essentially build out their summer learning services. What does that look like? What does that guidance look like in terms of planning, financing, their academic integration into summer, as well as like the whole child approach, inclusive of enrichment. Districts are typically used to account, the academic year, August through May, September through June. How do they adapt to include summer as an option in addition to that academic year? And it may be just for a portion of their young people. And so FHI 360 is working with them to adapt the findings from the toolkit, like I mentioned earlier. I mean, the National Summer Learning Project findings. So all of those lessons are then adapted for districts to work with and to integrate into their system. So that's one approach we've been taking. As part of that cohort, they do have where they're interacting with states with their SEAs as well. So if they have a high proportion of districts within a given states, that we do have a handful of states that are also engaged through that effort so that they can understand like a top down, bottom up of what's happening because of all of the ESSER money are through the SCAs and what's happening locally so that we can build more connections, collaboration across wherever we can. And all of this is through partnership with FHI 360. The other I think it's another important project that we have also funded is through the Children's Funding Project. And they're doing their work is really to look at fiscal mapping, where are revenue streams, knowing that typically, we support out of school time. So yes, this will focus on out of school time. So Elizabeth Gaines, who is the head of Children's Funding Project, has been mapping revenue streams, like what are the fundings available within a given state and how is it blended and braided by providers to provide their services. And Elizabeth is doing some mapping services. She will eventually create regional hubs. And I think that's a really important effort because you can't just talk about direct service without talking about the funding and what that looks like. What does the infrastructure look like? And I think that the pandemic really made us look back at, wait a second, do we have the supports we need in place to support families and young people, and especially young people who need it most, right? And are we reaching them? How are we reaching? We start to ask questions of ourselves, and I think rightfully so. That we do need to spend time reflecting and building out ways to reach young people, especially the ones that need it most.
That's great. And it's a perfect transition to kind of the next part of our conversation, which we'll be talking with a local funder. But I love kind of that analysis, like what are the other opportunities through the Children's Project, the other public funding dollars that could be blended and braided to help kind of sustain some of the expansion efforts that are beginning with ARPA funds during the pandemic. So Kate, I'm excited to welcome you into the conversation now to share a little bit about kind of like, what does this look like on the local level in terms of philanthropy's support for out of school time learning in the summer and throughout the year. And before we kind of jump in to hearing about what you are doing at United Way of Central Iowa, I'd just love to take a moment to hear your thoughts and reflections on what you just heard Polly and Kate share about the ways that they're working to support kind of states and communities in advancing or increasing opportunities for kids.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for being here. Well, as Polly and Gwen were talking, I was definitely feeling like we lived through everything that they were describing. Obviously, the pandemic hit in March. Iowa was on spring break when it hit and basically never went back to school. And so we quickly realized that the kids that were struggling the most were the most at risk. So we utilize our community school coordinators to make sure that families were getting basic needs such as food, and really anything. The community school coordinators, which are jointly funded between United Way and the district, were the boots on the ground people, really looking at every child in their school building and making sure that families were getting what they needed. And they're also correct in saying that summer and out of school time had to come to the rescue because kids needed a place to go. Families didn't want, in a lot of instances, the families that we're serving were not ones that were able to work remotely. So our summer programs really had to step up. And I didn't plan to say this, but, and not to brag on United Way of Central Iowa, but we provided over $2 million. I think that's right. Don't tell me if it's not, Cheryl, Marion. In pandemic relief directly to our partners, where we would survey them quarterly and ask what they need, and really let them be flexible in both the United Way funding and then provided additional funding for technology, whether that was hotspots, food, whatever the families were needing. But we coordinated a lot of that through the community school coordinators and through the school buildings. So I would just say, obviously, thanks to the Mott Foundation, the Wallace Foundation for continuing to support the importance of after school. It's something that we really believe in, and we know that it's critical all the time, but even more so the past few years. So.
Thank you for that. And I love like it's great to hear that local perspective of and the role that community schools can provide, that flexibility that you all were able to offer. And that's an impressive number, like to get support out to me, like, what are we hearing in terms of what families need, kids need, and how can we help fund that? To the conversation at hand in terms of out of school learning and summer learning programs, I know that United Way of Central Iowa has a number of programs. Can you take a minute to kind of a little bit of a high level overview about what some of those programs are and the children that you're serving through them?
Yeah, so I'll just start with this slide that we have. This is our United to Thrive framework. And what was interesting about COVID recovery, that was essentially went hand in hand with the time that United Way of Central Iowa, we were wrapping up our first series of 10-year goals, which ran from approximately 2010 to 2020. And we were trying to figure out what's next and how do we move beyond, high school graduation, for example, as the only measure of success in education. And so as those conversations were happening, we realized, hey, our community is in crisis across all of these areas, and we really need to do something that's more bold and more broad and maybe even a shorter term than 10 years instead of just going on and setting another 10-year goals. And that's how we kind of came to the United to Thrive framework, obviously with a huge focus on equity, because the pandemic told us that children that were the most vulnerable were not getting what they needed. And I know people probably don't think of Iowa as being very diverse, and generally as a state it's not, but for United Way of Central Iowa, we actually have 20 school districts that we cover in our 3-county area, but Des Moines Public Schools, which is our metro school district, makes up about half of the student population of those 20 school districts. And within the Des Moines Public Schools, there's over 100 languages spoken. I think it's closer to 120. People don't know that, but very, very diverse, and lots, not just one group of, individuals that are non-white, lots of different refugees and immigrants served by the district. So as we moved into what does out of school time look like under United to Thrive framework, we had I would say for the past 5 years leading up to 2020 and 2021, more of a focus on summer needs to be academic. And we were, kind of pulling out summer from out of school time and asking summer programs to become educational programs. And it just didn't feel right. Post-COVID, we really wanted to focus on making kids have a place where they were safe, where they felt that they belonged, and whether that was, cultural belonging or, getting their health and developmental needs met within their out of school time program. So we really we have some exceptions, which I'll get to, but for the most part, we look at our out of school time as being year round. And so you can see we have 15,775 youth that we serve in 45 programs. And then because of our partnerships with these programs, we're able to collect in an aggregate. Sorry, I'm at a hotel. There's a plane going over. Hopefully you can't hear it. We're able to collect aggregate performance measures from those programs. So we're able to know that of the 15,000 in youth in these programs, 85% of them are demonstrating growth, either academic or social emotional. Again, that measure highlights, we're not asking all programs to report on academic, because for some, it really is a focus on the social emotional. And then looking at failing grades. So this number can get a little skewed because we don't do fun failing grades for kids K through 3, but for the ones that are older. And then percentage of youth that are not chronically absent, which I'm assuming, she has the definition on there. I'm assuming everyone here is familiar with the definition of chronic absence. So this is just kind of a snapshot of our out of school time program. You can see that many of the kids, based on the circle charts over there, we're serving a lot of low income kids, a lot of racial diversity. So we definitely serve a lot of at-risk kids within these programs, and they are all year. So we're able to do more things during the summer, but we really focus on trying to provide quality out of school time the whole year, because we know that that's what improves kids' educational performance in the school building. So we can
Thank you for that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, just go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for that overview. And I love, and the explanation of the fact that you all are looking at it really kind of as a year-round effort and engaging kids both during the summer and after school and before school, to kind of continue that relationship. Can you tell us a little bit more about the programs that are represented in these numbers and the slide before us right now, and the way that United Way is supporting them as a way to support both elementary kids? And then I know you're doing some work with some older youth as well. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so if we want to go on to the next slide, this was one program we wanted to specifically highlight because it is more of a traditional summer program, and it is a collaboration between the West Des Moines schools, so not Des Moines, but it is kind of goes to the best practices that were listed by the previous presenters. It's looking at the most at risk in the school, really targeting who gets enrolled, looking at that 3rd and 4th grade level. So we're making sure that we're reaching those kids, getting them caught up on anything that they might miss. And then it does include a well-rounded schedule of academic instruction, recreation, and then opportunities for families to engage. So this would be, kind of the more traditional summer-specific program that we fund. And within that, we have a lot of others that we fund that are year-round, and I think that's highlighted on the next slide. And I think, was there a question in the chat? For our older youth, which is a huge focus of ours, because as I mentioned, we moved from our goal of 95% of youth graduate from high school to graduate with a plan for the future. So not only do we want them to graduate from high school, but we want them to have a plan for the future. That's the new focus of United to Thrive. And so what we're really trying to do is partner with our economic opportunity area and our nonprofits and trying to provide opportunities for youth to not only be engaged, older youth, to not only be engaged during the summer, but to make money. And so we have a huge focus on summer youth employment, and that can start as young as 14, and it can go up to, into 2022. So we have, you can see kind of the numbers there, but obviously serving a very diverse population, working with a couple of agencies. This is a program that we're always looking to expand. The students work 4 days a week, and then on the 5th day, they receive some of the soft skills training back at the nonprofit. So talking about resume building, talking about what do you wear to a job interview. And what's nice about this program is, I don't know if the rest of the individuals on the call are experiencing a staffing shortage with some of their out of school programs or, some of their youth serving programs, but we are. And so we're able to use some of these youth to work back in the summer programs, often ones that they participated in when they were young. We also have a career and college aspect, career and college exploration aspect of this. So we really try to provide a high quality experience for them through the summer.
Thank you. That's great. And yes, I think that staffing shortage challenge is nationwide. So that's a really innovative way to kind of address two challenges, like supporting youth and kind of a career pathway, but also meeting this immediate need to have support for younger kids in the program.
Yeah, and I wanted to shout out, because some of you might have Campfire in your community, and Campfire actually came to us this year with an opportunity and a program that they were proposing to train up their own staff to work with younger kids. So they're doing an actual apprenticeship with Campfire youth, that then they will be either able to work with Campfire or even in some of our other summer programs. So we were really pleased, and that obviously hit a lot of buckets for us, right? It's education success because it's looking at graduate with a plan. It's early childhood success because it's potentially working with young kids. And then we have a donor group of women that invest heavily in childcare, and it's a huge staffing shortage for childcare. So it was great, and we're really excited to hear the results of it.
That's wonderful. Can you share a little bit kind of about any lessons learned as a part of kind of the shifts caused by the pandemic, the shifts that were a part of kind of the United to Thrive that was a little bit already underway as the pandemic hit, and then also like any future plans that you all have in this area?
Sure. So the slide up is not going to be a surprise to anyone. It's basically kind of what was covered by the Mott Foundation and the Wallace Foundation. But what I would say just is kind of been more of a mindset shift for us. And what I alluded to was just the sense of belonging that we know that out of school time and summer programming can provide. And so we, obviously at United Way of Central Iowa, we pride ourselves on having outcomes and wanting to be results driven. So we have had to kind of guide our volunteers kind of strongly in some instances to say, yes, we want academics to happen in out of school time, but first and foremost, we want kids to be engaged and feel safe and, be in a place wherever possible, they're culturally matched to the out of school time program that they're attending. And then also obviously that it has ties to the school district. We have a great relationship with Des Moines Public Schools. We have a data sharing agreement with them. They hold partnership meetings for many of the partners that we fund. So we try to keep open lines of communication. But, and we know that we want to start career exposure as early as 3rd grade. That's another thing that we've had to really drill into our volunteers. We have some volunteers that serve on our investment bodies that are working companies. and they have had not so great experiences having younger kids visiting their businesses. And so how do we shift their mindset to say, you know, maybe they're not running through the halls, but is there something that you can do that provides them that exposure? So we want to focus on that college and career exploration. And then as they get older, that more hands-on career readiness opportunities. And we're working on a great partnership with labor. So really across many, many facets of our work. And then for the older kids, this has kind of grown out of our, not only our economic opportunity and our education, but also we've had some uptick in youth violence in our community and gun violence. And one of the solutions that has been laid out is that kids, you know, need money. And a lot of the times that there is violence or it's motivated by, it's a financial aspect of the crime. And so can we get kids into good jobs where they're engaged and they're making a decent wage, or they feel that that's a solution to, you know, less desirable behavior?
Thank you. That's wonderful. It sounds like you've got your plate full with work to continue and expand in the future. So I'd like to invite Polly and Gwen back into the conversation now and have kind of a full panel conversation as we're transitioning into the Q&A portion. Polly, Gwen, any kind of quick reflections that you'd like to share based upon what you just heard Kate talking about? Polly, do you want to go first? Okay.
I can chime in really quickly if that's okay. You know, when I started in out of school time in this program area at Wallace 20 years ago, we talked about time a lot and about how young people spend 80% of their time outside of school, right? And how time can be a resource. So when I heard Kate talk about, you know, the exposure that you can bring to those experiences and how meaningful they can be and how we can take advantage. I mean, they're readily available in our community. They're a resource. Time is a resource. Our communities are a resource, right? And I actually took note because I do have I have 3 kids, middle schooler, high schooler, and college. I did it to myself. But when she said graduate with a plan, I made a note. They're graduating with a plan, right? They're going to. Wish me luck.
I hear you. I've got a senior, so I'm thinking about it. Gwen, any quick reflections that you would offer based upon what you just heard?
Sure, you know, well, I just want to thank Kate for all the work she's doing and for her sister United Ways. You know, I just think it's such a great example of the real, you know, work in communities to put these programs together in a way that's going to be really engaging. And it's, you know, what strikes me too with, I'm just looking at some of the comments too while Kate was talking. You know, I think what we have the opportunity to do when you see that the, you know, amazing work that someone like Kate at the United Way is doing, we know how to do this. We know how to create amazing programs for kids, whether it's, you know, Kids Read Now, which is someone from the chat, you know, where you're providing books and mentors and resources. You know, we know all of these different components that so many kids and parents should have access to. So for me, you know, it really comes down to the question of how do we stop thinking like it's a zero sum and move toward, you know, we have 25 million kids who would have access, who would want to have access to after school programs and summer learning if they could, and who don't. And collectively, I think it's within reach to get there. So that's, you know, when I see Kate's work, that's what I think about. I think about how do we create this for everybody.
I love that. And actually, I'd like to start pulling some of the questions from the Q&A. We'll come back to that last question that we had outlined about advice, maybe as we're getting ready to close, but I think that was a perfect segue to a question that I saw in the Q&A just a second ago. let me see, where was that? I think it was talking about, so Lee Lurie was asking that, despite decades of effort for out of school time programs and after school programs, the US Census report last week showed that less than 18% of kids receive any educational opportunities over the summer. And so how might we, what can be done to scale what's up, take this research that we know about how important this is, we know what works, and make sure that it's reaching the kids who need it. Anyone want to respond to that?
I mean,
Huge and daunting challenge.
I could start off, since I was I was leading up to some of this.
Heat it up.
I do think that one of the encouraging things to me is during and post, or I hesitate to say post pandemic, but whatever phase we want to call this collectively that we're in now, we don't have all the data in yet about how much of a difference this whole sector and summer learning meant to kids and families. But we know enough from what we've seen so far that it really reduced suffering for millions of young people. So again, just, out to everybody there in terms of this whole area made such a huge difference. And I think when you look at where could we go here, it is looking at systems and policy work from, that's one thing that I think we need to think about. How do we support the policy to increase more resources? And what we've seen is states slowly, but definitely, there is momentum. There is new state money in several states, from California, which is a big, is a lot, to, all across the country, from Michigan to Massachusetts, where new state funding programs are being set up in response to this understanding, I think, and cry out of parents, especially working parents, to say, look, this is really critical. It was critical during the pandemic, and we actually think it should be critical moving forward. So I do see, I guess, a real strategy for building more policy, collective voice, from every community and district up through the states and national, to really get the resources so that it isn't kind of a zero sum.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Polly or Kate, anything that you would add to that? Can you hear me?
I do hear you. I'm thinking.
Okay, sorry.
No, I echo a lot of what Gwen shared in terms of, during the pandemic, it was an essential service. And I want to say it's an access issue. It's a belonging issue where families have to feel they belong in those spaces and should be able to find and access those services. And, I know that it sounds a little bit more like I'm stricter or being very like, it has to be this one way. But I also have to say, I turn to my cultural institutions in my neighborhood for services, right? I turn to libraries some of the libraries were closed during the pandemic, but they've begun to reopen. I look to those institutions. I look to other institutions in my neighborhood where I could have meaningful, educational. Some of it, it wasn't all educational. Much of it was experiential. But my family, I can afford, right? There are also cost implications for families. who are just working to put food on the table. There's so many barriers that young people face in terms of access to these programs. Transportation is one of them. Cost is another. And where do you put your priorities as a family? So that's the other thing. And, there are many young people without families, frankly. What does that look like? There's so many barriers to this. And I'm with Gwen, right? Every child should have access to these services.
Kate, any thoughts kind of from your perspective, like in the local community where you are in terms of opportunities or potential, or what it would take to, I'm not sure, like the 15,000 plus, almost 16,000 children that you're serving, how close are you to getting to meeting demand, and what could help you ensure that all the kids in your community who need it or can access it?
I would say access is also an issue. Iowa ranks in the top 10, mostly in the top 5 of parents working outside the home. So we know that every single day, the great majority of Iowa kids, whether they're 1 month or 12 years old, are needing some type of after school care, or they're going home, alone. So how we try to address it with United Way of Central Iowa is just funding a lot of different nonprofits in different neighborhoods with different population focuses, and really trying to give them flexibility to serve the families the best they can. We have universal preschool in Iowa, and that is another opportunity for families to get out of school time, but it's only half day and there's no transportation. There's some legislation making its way through to move that to full day. So that could help, but that won't help with the transportation issue. I just think that access is a huge thing. And what we try to do is just make sure that our services are spread out across our 3 counties and across neighborhoods, and that at least from us as a funder, we're not providing any extra barriers to the agencies to serve the kids.
Just wanted to flag that our evaluation poll has just popped up on your screen. Really want to encourage everybody who's on the line with us today to just take a couple of quick moments, share your thoughts and feedback with us on this. We're really trying to use these as a way to support continuous improvement and make sure that these conversations are meeting your needs while we continue the conversation. Let's see. So Gwen was touching on a question that came in the Q&A box a little bit in terms of kind of that distinction between the academic and the social and emotional support, and how that tutoring could be not just viewed as academic, but recognizing that kind of mentoring and connection, the relational bonds between a tutor and a tutee. Would anybody else like to kind of share any thoughts, reflections, response to that question from Ben Mitchell?
So I can just say that that's the push that we've been having to make United Way of Central Iowa as an organization, as well as the volunteers that help us make funding decisions, trying to look at any kind of out of school time as not only academic support, but including that social and emotional learning component. So we want both. Obviously, that's ideal that you would have academic and social emotional, but we definitely want any type of engagement with a caring adult, because we know the research shows that have a student just having one relationship or having a relationship with one caring adult outside of their family can make a huge difference in their academic success. So we also have mentoring programs that we support, and through some of our health and well-being work, just any kind of opportunities for youth to engage with individuals outside of their family is something that we would agree with. So,
and one thing, Sarah, that I didn't touch on too much earlier, but Kate really started to get into it a little bit more. It's not directly related to Ben's point, but I think our workforce is struggling. And Polly mentioned this too. I mean, across the education sector, including after school, definitely an area that many of us are interested in looking at more real systemic solutions to better career paths, how to support youth development workers, after school educators. And I think it does get to this point of the overall importance of that relationship, whether it's through reading literacy program, tutoring program, or something different. That when you look at what do we need to be focused on, that's a real, I think, opportunity for funders, because again, I think the focus right now is where it should be, but for programs, it is a struggle right now to provide the basic services. And I think the After School Alliance's recent survey on the workforce, I think it said we're still about a quarter of programs are not operating at full capacity. That's a lot. That's a lot of programs. That's a lot of kids not getting access, to Polly's point about access. So I would encourage folks, there is a group, an OST impact group at the Grantmakers for Education. Some of us participate on that. We're always looking for other local funders to get involved if you can, because these are not issues that we can solve on our own. It really is going to take a collective of funders, local, state, and national.
Mm-hmm. Gwen, thank you for mentioning that. If there's any link or anything that we can share both in the chat right now, and maybe in a follow-up that goes out to all the registrants, that would be wonderful to just make sure that folks know about that opportunity and can connect and take advantage of it. Quickly, there were a couple of questions about kind of parent engagement. One of the things that we know from the research is, regular attendance, and a lot of times that requires parent engagement, recognizing the importance and the value of their child going to the program regularly. Any either opportunities to use these programs to build relationships with families, both to connect the kids to the programs, but also to kind of connect what's happening in the programs to what's happening in the home. So, encouraging parents to engage with their kids around reading or other kind of learning opportunities at home.
I'll just start with one thing and then pass it to my colleagues. I guess I want to build on Polly's point about belonging. I think that another real opportunity, we talk about sort of the expertise of youth development professionals, has historically been undervalued. And I think hopefully through some of the pandemic experience, but I think there's still a lot of work to do there. It's critical to parent access and a sense of belonging. And it's critical. These are great opportunities in after school and summer learning to forge better connections, not just, between a program and a parent, but also with the school, because often, these things are all interconnected, hopefully. I mean, that's what we're really pushing for, right? And, I can't put my finger on it right at this moment, but I'm pretty confident to say that, we do have some really good research that shows how parents and families really will turn often to their after school or summer program because of that cultural connection, because they are dependent on it for some safety reasons for kids. All of those things are really conducive, I think, to increasing parent engagement. And, it really, I think it takes a broad-based approach.
Definitely. Polly, Kate, anything that either of you would add?
I do want to answer the previous question about the distinction between academic and social emotional. I want to just clearly say that all learning is social and emotional, right? It incorporates both and it's relational. So I endorse tutoring and mentorship as strategies to employ. It's absolutely, those relationships really do foster a lot of learning and lessons, and they're very important. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that as we close out. Thank you so much. And thank you, wonderful Gwen. So great to see you. And thank you so much, Kate.
Likewise.
So we are about, oh yeah, I guess we are, it's time for us to wrap up. So we'll just bring up the slides and just want to encourage everyone to register for some of our upcoming sessions. We've got another great session later on today to talk about social, emotional, and whole child. It's looking at the ways in which the Harlem Children's Zone is providing whole child support from cradle to career, building workforce strategies as well. We'll be dropping some registration links for all of these in the chat. Next week, we're going to be featuring the Diverse Books Coalition, talking about how to make sure that all children have access to diverse books that provide the mirrors and windows to build empathy with others. A Funder to Funder workshop on data, kicking off the month of April, and then a back-to-back sessions. There's only one of them listed here, but with Overdeck Family Foundation talking about high dosage tutoring and really using some of that research about those relationships that really that are core to and can be core to those, or should be core to those kinds of programs. And then quickly, just another reminder, encouragement for everybody to take a moment to share what you are doing, a quick survey about digital connectivity, digital access, and also learning in rich environments, so embedding learning opportunities across the community. Would love to hear from all of you. But a huge, 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 huge thank you to our panelists today, to Kate Bennett, to Gwen Hughes, and Polly Singh. Really appreciate you joining us and sharing your incredibly thoughtful insights on this important, incredibly important topic. And thank you all to everyone who's joined in today.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day.